Hi there, I'm Sonal Mehrotra Kapoor and welcome to Moneycontrol. Well, if there's one word that's really dominating every mind right now, when you catch up with friends, sit down with families, talk to your friends and family abroad, if there's one thing that everybody is discussing and feeling quite uncertain about, it is layoffs. From Twitter to Facebook to Amazon to Microsoft, big tech companies which are a dream job for so many of us, now laying off people overnight. If you talk about India, the story is not very different, especially in the tech space, especially in the startup world. From Byju's to Accenture to Unacademy to several others, the list goes on and on. So here, as the country, as the industry, in fact, goes through a big churn in India and abroad, is this a ripple effect just of the economy, of their own bad decisions, as some of these companies have come out to say? What should you do? If you suddenly find yourself without a job, what is your immediate port of call? How do you secure your immediate future, your family's future, what's to come next? If it happens in India, what's the protocol? What's the law? What are your rights? And if it's abroad, like the young man who traveled for a Twitter job to Canada and just in 2 days, lost his job and now has nowhere to go. What should people like that do? That got us thinking, and that's why we are here with you today. Joining me now is Deepa, who's an expert on human resources. She'll give us insights into what exactly happens with companies, what are your rights, what to look into, and also Ishani, who will give us the legal perspective on this. But before we begin, ladies, just a couple of numbers to really, for those who haven't understood, perhaps lucky ones who haven't understood the magnitude of this problem, just to get those numbers out. 13% of Meta's employees have been fired. That's about 11,000 of the 87,000 employees overall. But Meta still did not have a huge impact on India. Not a lot of India people and employees have been impacted yet. But then there are those, if you look at Twitter, the number even more staggering, 50% employees overall. And in India, the 90% of Twitter's workforce is now without a job. That's roughly about 200 people over here. Byju's a similar story. 5% of their workforce has been laid off, about 2,500 employees over there. And many saying this is again just the tip of the iceberg. There would be more rounds to follow. Unacademy as well, another edtech firm which has sort of fired 10% of its workforce. Stripe also 14% of its workers. That also they have been fired as well. And the list, like I said, really goes on and on, from Apple to Amazon. If they're not firing, there's a hiring freeze at least. Snapchat has laid off 20% of employees. And Microsoft, the layoffs there have begun. Intel also laying off 20% of their employees. These are just not statistics and numbers. These are people, lives, families, and futures who suddenly find themselves with a big question mark over their head on what to do next. It's a like I said, it's a question that has dominated several minds, and nobody imagined it would happen with such big companies which are a dream job, especially for us Indians, the hustlers that we are, to get that big job one day. So before we get into this, Deepa, I just want to understand first up, if somebody, I'm just putting myself in a position of someone who suddenly gets an email and their life changes forever. Immediately, what is it that one is supposed to do? I know some companies have a very clear policy. Meta, for example, Mark Zuckerberg's the letter that he wrote out to his employees with an apology, saying he's sorry, it was his call to invest big, and he sort of faltered, and then come up with a policy on severance, on medical care, etc., etc. These are companies who are perhaps more doing, are in the public domain, have larger stakes, have a lot of consumer sort of impact as well. they are talking about these regulations. But when it come to back home in India, the story becomes a little different, like we saw in the case of Byju's, where overnight entire office and a bureau was shut, then reopened again, and then people are fired and hired and all over the place. So if we can break this down into two pieces, one for Indian companies and Indian employees, and then we'll talk about those who are abroad, and especially those on visa. If you could just break that up for us.
Sure, Sonu. Let me take a stab at that. So what we're seeing across the globe today are redundancies, where for business reasons employees are being let go of. I'm calling that out because typically there are two kinds of layoffs. One is a performance-related layoff, where because of performance issues, specific employees are asked to go. But this is a mass redundancy based layoffs. Either there is a rule duplication or the business numbers haven't added up, right? That's a difference, and both of these will have to be dealt differently by individuals and companies. If it's a performance related layoff, then you have a different set of rights, and if it is a redundancy, then you have a different set of rights. So that's one thing, first thing for employees to kind of get right. And what we're seeing across the news, all the numbers you quoted are largely redundancies. Yeah, that's the first thing. Now, if you have been made redundant, if and I'm going to talk about the Indian companies here, you will have, while the law says a certain things that 30 months, 30 days of pay has to be, all the leaves have to be encashed. What will take precedence is the employment contract that you have signed. If your employment contract is better than what the law says, then the employment contract will hold. So the first thing to do would be to go and look at the terms that you have signed upon joining, which will clearly state that in case of termination, it is going to be X month's salary, this is how we will deal with leaves and all of that. So one, check what is the reason for being fired. Two, look at the employment contract right up front and check for what did you sign up? What did the company say it would do? And you can absolutely hold the company to it. I'll pause here, Sonal.
Yeah, yeah. So difference of understanding whether a particular employee has been fired or a bulk of them. We're obviously looking at the bulk of them at the moment. But Ishani, like you and I were discussing earlier, a lot of people, company contracts, especially in big firms, it's not really a negotiation, is it? It's just what has been set in stone, and people have to agree. It's like one of those privacy settings that we are forced to like sort of endorse these days. You really do not have a choice. So in cases like these, give me a legal perspective here.
So I have always been talking about this for the longest time, that the biggest farce of the entire contractual setup is a standard form of contract. You know, those standardized contracts that have large number of terms and conditions and fine print, which restrict and often exclude the liabilities rather than actually laying down the liabilities. So this is and the essentials of a contract, as we are taught under the contract law, is an is an offer and an acceptance. And the essence of the acceptance is that it should be a valid acceptance, that it should be made like fully consciously and alive to the terms and conditions of the proposal. So this is not to say that the man who signs an agreement blindfolded will be relieved from his obligations under the agreement simply because the latter chooses to discard the blindfold. But there has to be a certain, that certain negotiation, a certain level of a quid pro quo, which is just like blankly walked through. It's not seen. So we are not in a situation to even contest that where will be our seat of arbitration or dispute resolution if in case we get into a dispute. So that is a problem. So I think this should be done, in a blanket way. People should stand up to the rights and say that just because you're giving us uh, a just because you're giving us a job opportunity doesn't mean that we cannot negotiate a contract that has a term of employment.
Yeah, Ishani, I hear you loud and clear. But in India specifically, we've seen you can perhaps negotiate your contract to a certain degree when it comes to startups. but in big company, it's not really a negotiation. And what you're talking about is something that perhaps can be done only at the time of seeking employment. Let's cut to the point where you've lost your job. What are the laws here at the moment? And I wanted to sort of state it out because a lot of people, including me, till the time I researched about this, did not know what the law of the land really is and where do we stand. What is the minimum sort of severance that is supposed to come and follow. So if you could just lay out those top 3 points for us.
So the thing is that we are in the middle of a legislation change, right? So there is a legislation that has been passed by both the houses of the parliament, the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, and it's got the president's nod, but it is not yet notified. That legislation, it is called the Industrial Resolution Code, the IRC, and it will it will replace the Trade Unions Act, the Industrial Employment Act, and the Industrial Disputes Act. Now,
That's big.
yeah, that's big. That is the next legislation is in labor law. So it will change a lot of it has changed the way we define layoff. It says that it's an inability, like Deepa just talked about, it's the inability of an employer to continue giving employment due to shortage of resources, materials, parts, breakdown of machinery, natural calamities for employees in their payroll, right? And it also defines retrenchment as the employer deciding to terminate the services of the employee for any reason excluding disciplinary action. So just to put this clear in a clear way, that if there is, like we were talking about, if there's an individual firing, or is a bulk of people are made to leave the company, so that is how it is. So this is all these cases are cases of retrenchment under this act, because they are not there for a reason of performance or discipline. They are for the reason that the company cannot provide them employment any further than this, right?
Yeah.
So the severance wages have been increased. The 1 month notice period had always been in order, that there will be a 1 month notice period or a equivalent pay for the same. Now then, there is, if you've been employed by the same company, there's been a complete 1 year of continuous service, then you're eligible for 50% of basic wages and durance allowance. And also there is this 15 days of wages for every year of continuous service. So if you have been employed by the same company for 10 years, you will get a 150 day of wages, which which is very new, which is something that has not been there prior to this. So this legislation has taken the ascent. It is just there to be notified, and after this is notified, I think that it'll see a paradigm shift in our, anyway. We anyway have slightly tougher regulations, as we were just discussing, as compared to the other capitalist economies, because we are essentially a welfare state. you know um, can you hear me?
Yes, Ishani, we can hear you.
So, because we are essentially a welfare state, and we are different from the capitalist economies, because laying off is tougher here. But having said that, it'll make it a little more tough when this legislation gets through. But the only problem is, which is a problem with majority of our laws, which is the execution, because the labor court orders really don't get through. And when a person is in this basic pursuit of livelihood, going to the courts, getting into this entire business of courts, law, execution becomes tough. You just end one job and you try searching for the other, because it's a matter of bread and butter. So I think that's about that.
I think, thanks, Ashani. I completely agree. And like you pointed out, there is one part of what the law says and one part of what actually happens. Let's just spend a little more time on that, right? So the part about if it's a redundancy, which is the mass layoffs that we are talking about right now, the law actually says that you have to give 30 days notice to the employee before you can fire the employee. So you cannot, at least in India, and I'm talking about India, I'm not talking about the globe. In India, you have to give the person 30 days notice saying, we are making your role redundant, and only then can you go ahead and terminate the person. The second thing, if you're making that role redundant, the employee has the right, and by law, it says that you cannot be hiring for the same position again, right? So if you're making my role as a software engineer with 3 years experience with this specific skill set redundant, then you cannot be releasing an ad and hiring people for the same years of experience, same skill set from the market. But that doesn't really happen, right? So that's the second right that the employees have. If they're being made redundant, they have to be given notice. Second, the company cannot be hiring for the same skill set, same experience levels from the market when they're making my role redundant.
Which
That's a big one.
barely happens, no? Which barely happens.
Exactly. And let me come to why it doesn't happen, Sonal.
Yeah.
But before that, one last right that they have is they have the right to apply for IGPs within the company if they meet that criteria. The
What are
first right is
IGPs first?
internal job posting. So if there is a vacancy available in the company, they post it internally and it's called an internal job posting. They have to be given the right to apply for that if their skill sets match, right? If it's a redundancy, we're talking of redundancy and not performance and disciplinary things here. But all these things don't really happen, like you said, Sonal. It doesn't happen in real life. And that is because in most companies in India, most companies, I'm not going to take names, but big and small, most companies, they will call the employee into the room and they will ask the employee to voluntarily resign. The employee will be told, you're being terminated. If you can go ahead and give us your resignation, we will give you a clean exit. Here is 3 months' pay, and you can go. We will give you a clean reference check. You are sorted. Otherwise, we will have to go ahead and terminate you. That will eventually and anyway happen. Please go ahead and tender your resignation. The employee is given practically 30 minutes to sign that and walked out of the premises. So even if it's a redundancy in India, it is couched as a voluntary exit, which is why they're not given time in most cases. In most cases, that's what happens on the ground. So employees will need to kind of keep that in mind and make their choices appropriately.
Make their choices, or the lack of it really over here in most cases, as we are seeing. And the case not very different if we even talk about what's happening abroad. I mean, there the transparency at least is there. And like I said in the beginning as well, at least in Meta's case, they put out a statement saying, and Mark Zuckerberg at least came out to say that, I apologize that something like this had to happen, and we invested big and our vision did not match up, and so on and so forth. But well, we can talk about that. I want to shift our focus a little bit to the ones who are the hardest hit in a situation like this. And that, no prizes for guessing, are those who are stuck abroad now with an H-1B visa, which practically gives them just about 60 days to now find another sponsor, to get another job, or pack up their bags and get back home. In situations like these, how is one supposed to approach this, Deepa? Because again, I know there's a lot of ambiguity here. And if it's an Indian employee who has been expatriated, then the law of the land will apply. If it's a US employee, then it's different. So there's a lot of sort of legal loopholes one can really look into. But frankly, when you're in a situation like this, I'm thinking, legal is the last resort that you really want to look for. You want to understand where your next month's salary is going to come in. And especially if you're in India, you really do not want to go to the courts. That's the harsh reality. You don't want to stuck there in a court in a case that will drag you forever, which will sort of drain you of whatever, reserves that you have any which way. So how does one approach that? Deepa, to you first. I'll come to Ishan after that.
So, from a US perspective, you're absolutely right. Because it is a hire at will kind of a law, the employer is well within its rights to ask you to go And the law is very clear that you have 60 days. Unfortunately, there is not too much there. And yes, you're right that there are different categories of employment, even in the US. If you're working with an Indian company, for a company which has operations there and you're deputed there, then the different laws applies. But if you have a base contract in the US, then the law of the land will apply. So there are different categories, and depending on the category that you fall into, you would have to make plans accordingly. But there are limited options, especially there, because the law is very, very clear that the company is well within its rights to do that, and you will have to make those shifts, unfortunately.
You'll have to. Ishani, anything you can add over there?
So, not specifically with the legal provisions, but there are a couple of things which I wanted to add to the previous discussions that we were just having, which you just said. See, this shift of transparency or lack of transparency and lack of accountability is for a very clear reason. If you look at the basic market economics, we have a bigger workforce than we can sustain, that we can employ. You know, in a country like India, we have more skilled people than the job opportunities that we have, right? Hence, we have greater supply than the demand. So the employee who is called to the room, the point that Deepa made and is given and is told that just give us your resignation, we'll not fire you, doesn't have a choice, because we don't have a at will employment at will in per se the law, but we are actually in not a negotiating situation with our employer due to our very, very limited job opportunity. You understand? We're in that situation. That is why there's so many Indians abroad. Silicon Valley is the dream. We have 45,000 layoffs in the Silicon Valley.
Yeah. Ishani, hold on to that thought, because there's a question that has come in, which I think is quite interesting. There's this gentleman goes by the name of Speedy Singh. He writes that, what are our rights and how can we proceed legally if a company initiates to to leave the company or expel me? What should be the first move that I make?
So the question is that if a company intimates
is not firing me straight away, but is giving me a hint that I should go out and look for a job, something that Deepa was also mentioning. What is the first move that I make?
So if the company has not... Sorry, go ahead, Ishani.
Deepa, please go ahead. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So if the company, it's an interesting question, and you're not alone in thinking about it. Harvard Business Review has published a research paper saying companies are actually using that strategy. Sonal, you'll be surprised to know, but it's called quiet firing, right? Where they actually come and tell you that not in so many words, but they make it harder for you to stay in there. Your role, you're demoted, your responsibilities are changed, you're not given that promotion, your workload is made unmanageable, they're ghosting you in meetings, you're being disrespected. And all of those are ways for companies to let you know, right? And I think two things here. One is being prepared is a superpower, right? I think many of us live with this feeling that it won't happen to me. I will not be the one who's pink slipped. I have done this performance. My last quarter's results have been outstanding. I'm a top performer in last year's ratings. It can't happen to me. I think it's important for all of us to just accept it can happen to me. That allows each of us to be super prepared. And being prepared is a superpower. It helps you spot the signs, right? And if you're getting these signals, my suggestion would be to, and you could look up that Harvard article as well, my suggestion is to first have a conversation, an open conversation with the company, with your manager, with one level above, saying, I am sensing this. My responsibilities have been demoted. You are not even respecting me in meetings. XYZ is being done to me. Is this something that we can work on? Do you want me to do something different? What are these? And that would be the first port of call. Pull that up, have an honest conversation about where is it coming from. Please don't turn a blind eye saying it can't happen to me. I think that would be the first port of call. Few others, but that's the first port of call. So
Yeah, no, that's extremely useful, and I think it's also useful in the context of current tech, employees all over, because there's this sense of nervousness and anxiety that I feel talking to any of the people who are in the tech industry right now, even in the startup world, where their life is literally on the edge, and they every little performance review gets them really nervous. Will I have this job? Will I not? So you're right to have an honest conversation about this with your manager and be prepared is perhaps the first thing one can do. Ishani, what would you say is like a legal protection of sorts? Again, I know a contract, going back to it, how much
Yeah,
reliable it is, really, I don't know. But
that
legally, what is the first thing one must look at?
so Deepa got us to a very important point, that contract, any contract, any employment contract, anything will come into play when they fire us. If there's something called quiet firing, or if there is something that they're making the atmosphere inconducive for me to be able to perform or sustain, so that would, I would say that that is more of an harassment tactic, or trying to make a person resign, than that will fall in the ambit of having this legal, the legal recourse to the, to, going by the labor laws or stuff. That what bracket would it fall in? How are we supposed to ensure that we get our dues and all of that? So that comes secondary, right? First, it is a lot of stress, it is a lot of mental agony, it is a lot of so I think, as she said, that you should look out for signals, you should try searching for other employment opportunities, and in the meantime, if this gets a little something that you would not be able to take, then there should be a calling out, that this is impacting my right to livelihood. This is something that the Constitution of India guarantees to me, and it is read into right to life and personal liberty, right to livelihood. So you cannot just snatch this away from me without a proper justification. Leave
Yeah,
the
I
labor
also
laws.
think when it comes to tech, the laws are so, we're always catching up, right, with tech industry and with laws in general. So while labor laws in certain other industries, and there is organization and there is unionization, when it comes to tech, we don't have a platform like that, right? There's no big one, a platform which is taking these issues quite seriously, because the industry itself is so, one can call it nascent, but it's developing at such a fast pace that we don't know if there is one sort of, court that you can go to, or how you can go about the whole process. By the way, just want to
Or it
remind our
is,
viewers, we're taking all our
or
questions live right now. So if you have any question, please leave them in the chat, and we'll have Deepa and Ishani both answer them as well. Sorry, Ishani, you were saying something. Let me just, yeah.
no, these are, see, because as I mentioned, the industrial relations code, it is mentioned, it is covering all of these industries. No, these are blanket legislations. So
Hmm.
all of these, so the norms of the industry can, can change as the as the industry matures, as things settle and all that. But laws are pretty much the same as for the
Yeah.
rest of the industry.
No, I meant there is no unionization, or correct me if I'm wrong, when it comes to IT per se.
Yeah,
There is
yeah.
there is, I know for at least media, there is an association, there's a trust, and where you can go. I know lawyers have a very strong one. I know other industries have their unions to sort of go
Yeah,
to,
you're right.
and
You're right.
organizations in a way which will fight for the rights of people in there. I don't think there's one in tech actually. That was where I was coming from. But before we go any further into this discussion, I just want to read for our viewers some of the testimonies that I've been going through the past couple of days of people in United States and other places who have lost their jobs overnight. And it's really gut-wrenching to imagine yourself in those positions. There's one by Ruchita on our screens as well for everybody to see right now. She says, she writes on Twitter, in fact, this is a LinkedIn post if I'm not wrong. She says, "Hello all, unfortunately, I'm amongst the 50% employees who were affected due to layoffs at Twitter. I'm forever grateful to have worked with such talented, hardworking, and kind group of people. I'm extremely thankful for the amazing team that I've been privileged to work alongside. I learned a lot in Twitter and grew as an engineer. I'm currently look at these people. Fire don't have a future, but still so grateful to the organization. Still writing, beginning by saying that I've learned so much. Then she goes on to lay out the real story. She says, "I'm currently on H-1B visa and have limited time to find another opportunity. I have 5 years of experience, actively looking for new opportunities. If you're hiring or would share open positions, please feel free to comment, message, or email." Another desperate plea. This is by Sushmita, another software engineer at Twitter. She says, "Unfortunately, I was part of the layoffs at Twitter. While I'm heartbroken for what happened to me, so many other fellow tweets. I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with talented people. I want to thank everyone and reached out. I appreciate everyone of you for my next role. I'm looking for open SWE positions backed by full-time development." And she again goes on details as well. Imagine like people with experience, 10 years, 15 years in the industry, all of a sudden finding themselves without a job. And like I said, it's one email. There was another email that we were flashing on your screens as well for our viewers to see. Suddenly at 3 a.m. in the morning, you realize that your logins have gone. Suddenly you come to office and you realize the doors have been shut. You can't get in. Suddenly you realize that what is really happening is so little time to really fathom. And that brings me to the point of preparing. This is the one I was talking about. This is Chris, who says, "Well, this isn't looking promising, can't log into emails, Mac won't turn on, but so grateful this is happening at 3 a.m. Really appreciate the thoughtfulness of the timing front, guys." Again, this is real sarcastic note, but one can really understand, only begin to understand what they must be going through. Deepa, any more details you want to add here?
I think each of these are human and true experiences. I'm going to just talk about a few things here. Sonal. One is to be prepared. Second one, I don't know if there is a kind way to say this, but I'm just going to say it the way it is, right? Many of us will have to just move on from that point, right? From the point that your accesses have suddenly got stalled, your emails won't work, and for many of us, we store all our personal information, our salary slips, everything just stays on the office machine, and when you get locked out, you just have no access. You feel so helpless because you can't access some of the web documents that you need to find another job. Your offer letter is on your office intranet. Your salary slips are on your office intranet. All of it is there, right? And I think employees who go through this will have to start looking at all those kind of things, find ways to get access to it. I know there was another Twitter incident where one of them actually said that because he helped his other employees who were fired to get access to it, he was targeted, right? There was another incident that came up from Twitter. So access to your own documents is something that employees will really have to figure out. The second thing that they'll have to figure out is, in many cases, like the big companies, they've gone ahead and said how much are they getting, 3 months, 6 months. But if it's in India, the law says 1 month. Most companies will ensure that you have 3 months pay that is put there. That's something that you have to kind of go ahead and check for and make sure that you're getting it. Make sure that your severance contract extends that, because that's going to give you a cushion for the next 3 months at least to keep the family going, to keep the kitchen running until you find another employment. So the documents are important. Finding what kind of money are you due for, making sure that you're not leaving it on the table at such a critical time because you're worked up, because you're so aghast that this has happened to you is important. And that's something many companies, especially in the tech world and even otherwise, will offer outplacement services. That is something that they put on the table, which means that there is going to be a recruitment firm which will work with you in helping you get your resume out. They're going to work with you for either X months, or they're going to work with you to get you the next 3 interviews, right? So ask for outplacement support from the company when it's happening. That's something that you can definitely explore. Many of these companies actually offer that.
Yeah.
So
You're making a very important point, Deepa, because this is what happens with a lot of us. Most of our documents are locked into the internet, and if you suddenly lose access, how do you even begin applying for the next job? How do you even show evidence of a salary slip? How do you even show or check into what your policy is, where your health insurance lies, what is happening to your car insurance? If it's a company car, what's going to happen next? Like so many details we never remember to take backup. So take backup. That's what you're saying essentially. Always have that in your personal documents, especially during these troubled times when we know the economy world over is going to take a turn. So keep that very, very important to keep that in mind. In fact, I think that's good for everybody, not just tech companies as well, as we do that. I just want to quickly take a couple of more questions and see where we are there. uh, Speedy Singh saying thank you guys, by the way, for answering his question so diligently. There are others making comments saying just get a government job, at least that way you're going to be secured. But well, you have to be an engineer and still apply for a PhD in India, and that's the government job you're going to get. So good luck with that. There are others where they've talked about. Uh, oh, this is interesting, Deepa. I don't know if you want to answer this. The question says, "Do HR guys also get fired?"
oh, yes, if you saw the Mark Zuckerberg's note, he clearly called out saying most of our firing is going to happen in the recruitment team because we're not hiring so many people. So yes, HR pros do get fired for a lot of reasons, including redundancy.
All right. I was just thinking about this entire sort of a period that has gone by. And yes, we're talking about layoffs right now, but actually, layoffs began right when the pandemic hit us, didn't it? We've come from the pandemic to now to this period in the middle where tech companies, if they boomed during the pandemic, the rest of the industries were really firing people. Then the impact on the tech industries came actually post the pandemic, right? When offices opened up and reality struck them, and as Mark also says in his analysis that he perhaps misunderstood, they thought that the boom is going to continue, and because of some miscalculation at the CXO levels, we are now seeing these firings happen here as well. Ad revenues being hit, and multiple reasons really. We've done a separate video for anybody interested on what's happening with tech per se and what the future is looking like. So check that out on our Moneycontrol YouTube channel separately. But have we really learned no lessons here? I'm just trying to, wrap my head around it. We've had 2 years of constantly seeing layoffs, of constantly being in these uncertain situations, but still, do we have nobody and no one person we can go to, no one law? Of course, Ishani talks about that there is one coming up, but still pending in Parliament. Is there? I'm just not, able to wrap my head really around it. Ishani, can you give some clarity there?
Yeah, that of course what you're saying makes so much of sense. I have, that. So I will get a little political here. When we had the first cabinet, Babu Jagjeevan Ram was the first labor minister for the country, right? So he had the rank of cabinet. He was a cabinet minister. Very lately, around 2014 or 2000 something, 15, 17, the rank of the labor minister was changed to a normal independent charge minister. The cabinet rank was taken back. Up, I think right now in 2019, 2020, it was reinstated as the cabinet minister. So do you see the importance of of a ministry in a country where employment and labor is such a huge issue? But I think maybe because of the majority of unskilled labor, because they can't really stand, they don't know their rights, they can't stand up for it. So all of this prioritization is very very sad, because there is no evident no evident law mechanisms and stuff. Nothing is out there. There is everything that is based there somewhere there, but there's enforcement, this mechanism to get it as and when. As I said, that right to livelihood is a part of right to life and personal liberty, article 21 of the Constitution of India. It should be treated as speedily as a writ jurisdiction is. because it's about lives, it's about families in a country where we lack social security. We healthcare, accident insurance, that we hardly have things like that. We don't have
Yeah.
anything called unemployment wages also, like a decent amount of it. So we need employment to get the motor running, and we
Yeah.
need to lessen the labor issues. This should be
Yeah.
a priority.
Yeah. I'm just going to start wrapping up the discussion now. So, last thoughts, really, ladies and Deepa, to begin with. I think what's happening is one has to deal with it and one has to get on. And of course, these are lessons I hopefully those even in job are taking very seriously, because like you and I were also talking, when it comes to tech firms, we perhaps are just seeing the tip of the iceberg, and much worse is about to come, especially in the US, especially those on expatriation, especially those on visas, because they are going to be the hardest hit. But if today, if today I am negotiating an offer with someone, can you give me three things to keep in mind, or three things to really go hard in negotiation over in these uncertain economic times?
I think question, and I'm going to take that in one more stance to it, right? So, if you're negotiating today for an employment contract, you will obviously do all the obvious things such as salary and medical insurance and all of it, right? You will also look for what is the termination clause that the company has put in. What are you eligible for? That's something that you will definitely look into, right? Having said that, that's definitely one clause in the current context of the discussion that you're going to look at. Having said that, what you would also do is to be prepared. And when I mean by prepared, you're going to, like Sonal mentioned, you're going to take backups, you're going to change the ways that you work. You're constantly going to look at skilling yourself. Even when you're in the job, you're not going to get complacent. So you're going to explore what kind of learning opportunities does the company give you, right? That's something that I would request you to keep in mind. Does the company encourage learning? Do they invest in your learning? Are they going to give you a lot of skilling opportunities which they will sponsor or which they will provide you access to? That's another important element. And I see many employees disregard that for versus a paycheck. But what kind of investments in learning will the company do for you, on you, so that you
Yeah,
remain relevant? Is a
correct.
very important thing. And I think you should look for that, ask for that, see what you're eligible for, and keep that in mind. Those would be two clauses, sort of.
Right. Ishani, what would you look at?
So again, standard form of contract, I would seriously tell people to look at what is the exit clause. And for that matter, because we have viewers for any contract you enter into, the first thing that you need to look at is an exit, a decent alternate dispute resolution, so that you can fasten the process by an arbitrator who's appointed duly by both the parties, and not a sole arbitrator, because that doesn't hold valid under the current law. So basically, because the court process is very long, and all these companies, they have a retainer where they have a lawyer who will go and produce, and the problem will be of the employee, because for that employee, he'll have to go to court again and again till he actually gets access to justice, right? I'm not even
Right.
saying justice, the access to justice, because it's a very
Yeah.
very long process. That is why for all these disputes, there should be an alternate dispute resolution clause in the contract, where you can negotiate your terms of exit, your forms, whatever, in front of an independent arbitrator who gives you a clearer
Yeah.
picture of what
Yeah,
goes forward.
especially because in India you don't get damages per se, right? Even if you
Exactly.
were to take it, the best case scenario you can get out of an Indian law court is going to be that you actually win the case, but all you'll get is your salary of the months that you thought you should have been employed
And
for. You don't get damages.
so
Yeah,
it's all pressure building mechanism, right? I withhold the salary for a year, and I know that you're going to take 2, 3, 4 years from the court to get it. and then I will have to just release the salary. You realize, so I am creating this pressure on you so that you cannot take a legal recourse. I pay the lawyer on my retainer. They'll go and attend to the case. You will have to run to the courts, pay the money, pay to the lawyers, and get, go through that ordeal for a period of 3-4 years.
Yeah.
Hence,
I know a
a
lot of
person
people even listening to this right now would be, well, that's the last thing on my mind that I have time, energy, or money to do. Whatever I'm
and
getting, I'm going to just, pocket that and move on with my life because I have, mouths to feed at home. I think that's the harsh reality that one has to really deal with. Well, thank
so
you, ladies, so much for joining us. Sorry?
alternate dispute resolution and ADR clause is very important, and arbitration clause is important. Also, there is the new code that is to come that has an employee reskilling. So the code is allocating funds because Deepa mentioned reskill, the adding to the skill. So the new code has allocated funds for the employees to upskill themselves, the ones who have been, retrenched. So
Right.
there is something like that.
And these are hard times, not just for employees being fired, but also employees who have their jobs because they're uncertain. They don't know when the axe will fall.
Yeah.
It's tough times for everyone.
The market is correcting itself, right? Everybody's switching to a leaner structure. The big tech companies, the small tech companies, they're all laying off. They're picking up a leaner structure in order to reconstruct themselves post COVID. Pandemic is the turning point in all of this, because we
Well,
just
that
mentioned
and
the
much more, like I said, but time for me to take one last question, if Deepa, you could add, because it's an interesting one. This is Atub who says, any guesses when this layoff season is going to end?
I'm sorry to sound like a doomsday predictor, but I would definitely urge that each of us remain prepared. Whether it's this mass layoff, whether it's some other event, I don't think you and I should try predicting where the bottom of the market is, but you and I should be prepared to stay relevant, to skill ourselves, and to make sure that we have safeguarded our interests. I don't think we should predict this market or the end of this.
Well, that's a grim, grim note, but perhaps an important one. The good reality check we've got towards the end. Thank you both, Deepa and Ishani, for joining us in this conversation, and to everybody else who tuned in. I hope this was helpful. If you want any further clarifications, we'll be running a hashtag very soon. So do send in all those questions over there. You can leave your comments later on. This entire conversation will stay on our YouTube page, so you can go back, share it with your friends and family, somebody you think will really be needing this right now. If you have further questions, we'll be answering all those questions as well on the chat. For now, stay strong, stay prepared. I think that's the key message that's coming out of here. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Bye bye.